Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this wonderful session. I first have to ask, do we have anyone 100 years old in the room? Oh man, I thought we get like one centenarian. Okay. Well, we are here and so excited to be talking about living to 100, which may soon be routine. And our guest, Susan Golden, is going to help us on that journey and look at the map of life, as she calls us, that can guide us. So Susan is the author of, hold it up, Susan.
Okay.
Stage, Not Age, a wonderful book. It is the subtitle is How to Understand and Serve People Over 60, the fastest growing, most dynamic market in the world. She teaches at Stanford Business School, and she's director of the dciX Impact Initiative at Stanford Distinguished Careers Institute. So Susan, welcome to the Aspen Ideas Festival. So glad to have you here. So this is such a great title, and not just because it rhymes, but tell me what you mean by stage, not age.
So traditionally, as people think about older adults and they stereotype them as everybody being elderly, senior, they think of them as one group. Everybody 65 and older is the same. They're frail, they're declining, they have health issues. And that's no longer true because people are living much longer lives with health span. And the concept that we're being defined by age instead of what stage of life we're living in is a real disservice to the older adults and to what they need and want with these extra 30 years. If you knew you were going to have an extra 30 years living with health, you might want to prepare and live your life differently than we traditionally have in the past, when average life expectancy was only at about 65. So we have this gift of longevity. We now want the gift of healthy longevity, and we need to prepare and plan for it, and that was the impetus behind the book. What do individuals need to think about for the different stages they want to live through, and how can companies and entrepreneurs and innovators build products and services and systems to support their healthy aging?
So if 65 plus is not one stage, how many stages do you think it is?
So if you think about traditionally, there's been a three-stage life that has been defined as learning, then earning, and then retire or serve. I've conceived of it as 18 stages of life. You don't have just one next chapter, you have many next chapters. And I think the most vibrant stage that a lot of people are going to be in is somewhere between 50 and 85. Where they're rethinking what their life purpose is, what their priorities are. I call it the Renaissance stage. It can be one of your happiest times of your life. The research shows that people in their 60s and 70s are in their happiest times. And why not build a very purposeful and meaningful life rather than just in that category of retirement and that everybody is declining, which is really no longer the case. Yes, for some people, but for the majority of people, we're going to be living much longer lives with much greater health span.
Why are people that age range particularly happy?
It's interesting. There's a lot of research on how people selectively remember certain events in their life, and they can distinguish and remember the better times and put aside, and that life was more purposeful as you got older. And your relationships become far more important. There's a lot of great research about how most people, all they need is 4 or 5 good, close friends, and that's sufficient. But in a lot of the earlier years, people are building and amassing networks and having many friends, and social media actually makes this quite more complicated, where people want to see how many likes you have and how many thousands of friends you're connected to. And really what research has shown is that it's the quality of the relationships that matter so much, and that people who are older have come to recognize that. So they have deep connections as they get older.
One of the most intriguing things I think about what in your book is the thought of going to school at a much later age than has been traditionally accepted, which is something you did.
Right.
So can you talk about how you did that and how that can fit into this sort of thinking of stages rather than ages?
So traditionally, we all went to school up until our 20s, maybe into our 30s, and then had a career that lasted till our 60s. But people are going to be working much longer, want to work much longer, so that they have purpose and community. And I had taken a career break, as many women do, initially thinking it was just for a few years till my youngest, who happens to be sitting here, went off to college. But while she was growing more and more independent, I had a widowed mother who was becoming more and more frail and declining. And I was in a caregiving role in different stages of my life. I had to postpone my wedding in my 30s, and then took care of her in my 50s. And at the end of the process, I really thought, this is silly. I couldn't navigate the healthcare system for her successfully, and she did not have a good death. And here I have a background in public health. I speak English. Well, what's it like for everybody else? And just at that time, Stanford was starting a new program called the Distinguished Careers Institute, which I recommend to each and every one of you to put on your bucket list. Imagine going back to college, basically. Take any course you want in the university, and you don't have to take the tests. You're just there to learn. You're just there to absorb. And in my group were people anywhere from 50 to 75, all rethinking what we wanted to do next, and then thereafter. And I realized we were all in the same stage, independent of our age, and we were all in this very vibrant time when we were rethinking our purpose, our priorities, what we wanted to do, how we wanted to contribute. And it was an amazing experience, and continues to be as I now work there on some of their impact initiatives. But it totally reframed my mindset, because Stanford has a Center on Longevity where I spent a lot of time, and they're thinking about what's the new map of life. If people are living to 100, our children should definitely be planning to live to 100. And if any of you are 65 and you've lived with good health, you have more than a 50% chance living into your 90s. So we all have this extra 30-year gift, and we need to think about where we want it. Do we want it all at the end, or do we want it spread out over the course of a lifespan? And that's how I conceived of the many different stages we're going to go through with much longer lifespans, all of which are very purposeful and are not sequential. And so continuous learning is going to be critical if we're going to live longer, because you need to retool, you need to upskill. So I went back to school in my 60s. I also went back for another graduate degree in my 30s. And I can imagine in another 20 years, I might go back to school again. The world is changing, and continuous learning is going to be the gift that will help you have healthy longevity.
You said something to me earlier that's really stuck with me, which is that, let's say you're like most people, you graduate from college, you're 21. To think that that education you got at 21 is supposed to serve you into your 80s doesn't really make a lot of sense.
It doesn't.
Yeah, you might need a refresher.
Yes, multiple times. And I think employers are beginning to recognize this, that their workforce needs to be upskilled routinely, but our financial institutions aren't supporting this yet, because we're not all saving for our own education up until our 80s and beyond. And we haven't redesigned our educational systems to support lifelong learning, or some people call it long life learning. And this should be an essential ingredient in each and every one of our lives. So if you're planning on 30 extra years, you're going to want to make sure you have stops along the way for continuous learning. And it's wonderfully fun, and it's a way to have community, and you make new friends. Can you imagine making new best friends in your 60s and 70s? And that's what happens in these programs.
That'd be amazing. So usually we do audience questions at the end, but I think I'd like to intersperse them, because I think she's already given us so much great material here. So if people want to raise their hands, we have microphones that will go out to you, and just don't start talking till you have a microphone in your hand. So I think you're headed to someone. I will trust you to head to someone.
Hi. I loved everything you've said as a 74-year-old. The question I have, and I'm relating from my own experience, is in many ways I feel physically in good shape and able to do things and mentally competent, but there are things that do start to fade as you get older, regardless of your health span or anything else. Your memory, your ability to get around quite as nimbly as you once did. You make it sound as though it's sort of just this continuous extension of the way it was before, and I don't think that's really jiving with my own personal experience, even though I feel great and I'm absolutely brilliant.
We can tell.
I mean, you're absolutely right. There's great variation in how we're all going to age, and we all wish it'll go like this. And at some point, we'll all begin to lose some capabilities, or some things will be harder. But it doesn't mean that you can't be productive and engaged and happy. And that had been the stereotype that everybody, the way people viewed all older adults, that they needed to retire at a certain age because they didn't have capacity and wisdom and lots to contribute to society. So you're right, we're going to experience some hearing changes, vision, dexterity. We may not run as fast, but we still can be incredibly engaged and productive along the way. And for some people, it'll be harder. I mean, there is, we hope we will be free of serious disease as long as possible. And there are things we can do to hopefully work towards that.
Okay, let's see. Who else has a microphone? There you go. Why don't you go ahead and just pick a person.
So my major takeaway from what you had to say is aging will be aging. But if we use our brain, which I just heard Maria Schreiber speak for women's health, we have a stronger sense of purpose to have a longer lifespan. Did I hear you correctly?
Yeah, I think if we're engaged in a purposeful activity, it helps. Because it causes you to be connected to people. We know, we've heard this a number of times in the last couple of days, social isolation is the most detrimental part of aging, and people's loneliness and its equivalent, and it causes health problems. So if you're engaged in activity in a purposeful way, and it's not a matter of doing puzzles, that's really just not the thing, or doing Wordle. I mean, it helps, but not enough. But it's having a purpose. And your purpose can change, and it should change over the course of a 100-year life. So, but we need time to rethink our purpose and to reevaluate what are our life priorities. But having meaningful connections well into your hundreds is possible, and that, for me personally, that is my goal. And it's not just one next act; it's many along the way. And that's why I think of this now as a multi-stage life and not a 3-stage life.
I don't think it's working. And one way is to continue going and learning.
I think that's critical.
New things.
And it doesn't have to be a full-year program, although that's this incredible privilege and gift. I mean, it was like it made you feel 20 again because you're around 20-year-olds. But it could be, being connected to people online. There's a lot of great companies that have started up now for older adults to find other people that are like-minded and want to engage in certain courses, activities. So there's a lot of happening in that area right now, and only growing, because they're recognizing people want to engage in learning opportunities, but together, not just alone.
Right. Thank you.
Let's see, we'll do one more question, and then I get to ask questions because, I'm in charge. Do you want to give someone a microphone? Thanks.
I have been blessed with a family tradition that looks like it's really working according to your plan. I really wish you had observed my family. My father had 3 careers. He started off in sales, he became an insurance executive, and then went on to be a stockbroker. Watching that through my college years, I realized you don't get stuck somewhere. You can keep going if you find things interesting. I became a high school teacher, went on to become a commercial realtor, and at 55 said, oh my, what do I do for the next 30 years? So I went to law school, and I practiced law, and during that time started a nonprofit that is now 16 years later, and I'm 79 years old, but I feel 25. So I think this is a good plan. And I'm happy to say that my daughter, who was a NASA flight controller for 22 years, at age 52 after having her children, is becoming a nurse. So I think you're on to something really great, because I know from our standpoint that it's really is working.
Oh, I'd love to profile your whole family in my next
It's
update.
been great.
It's really exciting.
So my question is, why aren't we all doing this? It's so much
Because
fun.
we've been told for so long we can't or shouldn't, or it's over at 65, or whatever number you want to pick. But you can see that there's, such vibrancy in your life and your whole family's life, and
Yeah.
that should be the goal. And, it won't be easy all the time, but
Oh, the law school experience could have been harrowing, but I ended up loving it because I didn't have the trauma of the younger people who are worrying about, how do I learn this? How do I get that job? How do I plan my life?
Right.
This nice guy here just said, go do it. And that made it possible. I didn't have a mortgage. I didn't have any of those things. I was a legal aid lawyer for 10 years. And that was just a wonderful place. I didn't make any money. The sanitation workers made more money than I did. But it was a terrific experience.
that's a wonderful story.
To follow up on what she said, this obviously worked for her, this sounds amazing. When in your research, did you find that employers were willing to hire people at sort of older than typical ages?
Yeah, not every employer, a little different in certain industries. But we're seeing a trend where companies are recognizing the value in the older worker in terms of their wisdom, their loyalty, their maturity. And a number of companies have started programs that they call returnships. And this is and some of the name brands, Facebook has one, Google, JP Morgan, on and on and on. And it's basically a 16-week paid internship for you to upskill. They're going to kind of catch you up on what you missed out on if you've taken time off for whatever purpose. And then at the end, they offer you a job, and you decide if it's a job that you want. But people are recognizing the value of the older worker, as the younger workers tend to bop around a little bit more, and they're looking for longevity in the workforce. And this is a great new opportunity. There are companies that offer these returnships and get you matched to companies that are profiled in the book. And it's really an exciting trend. And every employer is beginning to really rethink how they have to be age ready, that their own employees may not want to work that 60-year continuously, but they might want to take career breaks along the way, and then going to need continuous learning along the way.
And does it help that there are worker shortages in many
It does help.
industries?
It definitely helps, and we saw that during COVID. I mean, many of the heroes of COVID were older workers who came back into the workforce, doctors and nurses and computer programmers who knew obsolete codes. So we're seeing a shift in part because of what has just happened with COVID.
And you also mentioned during one of the heroes, Tony Fauci,
Yes,
that
absolutely.
people looked at him and
Yeah.
saw an 80-year-old man. And
who runs and is vibrant as any 40-year-old. I haven't met him, but I admire him enormously.
Is there previously was there sort of ageism and discrimination in workplaces for a particular reason, or is there still is the concern that older people won't keep up? Like, what's the concern?
Yeah, ageism is real. It's still there. And it's a stereotype, and you can do it to yourself by saying, senior moment when you forget something. Don't say that. Don't use that word. Don't use the word senior. Don't use. But if you talk about when people go to apply for work, if they're older, if they sell that they're creative and innovative, that seems to deflect that stereotype about ageism, that people are not looking
They're
forward.
Stuck in their ways.
They're stuck in their ways. They're more traditionalist. But ageism is real, and there's a lot of great efforts being made worldwide, including with WHO and the UN Healthy Aging Council, to address ageism in the workforce. And many companies are taking longevity pledges to address this. So it's there, but it's getting better. People are naming it. In San Francisco, right before COVID, they had a campaign on billboards and backs of buses to portray older adults as creative and innovative, and showed all types of older adults. They all look different, all, from no wrinkles to many wrinkles, to say, and the tagline was, "This is creative, this is innovative." And it was really addressing the stereotypes of what an older adult is. And that's the thesis behind the book. You shouldn't be defined by your age. You should be defined on what you can contribute and what stage of life you're in.
That's wonderful. And we talked a bit about COVID changing the mindset. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So COVID did many things. It took many of the conversations that were sort of whispered into the forefront. And one important one, and near and dear to my heart, it was about caregiving. Many women in particular have taken time off for caregiving and had previously had a hard time coming back into the workforce. And during COVID, Women were disproportionately impacted, needing to take career breaks to take care of an aging relative, take care of their children who were being schooled at home. And that became a national conversation, and that we don't have an infrastructure for caregiving. And that makes me sad, and it makes the 48 million unpaid caregivers in the United States very sad. And there's actually a new effort to create new innovations to support caregivers, these family members who are doing heroic work. Pivotal Ventures is supporting a whole accelerator in Washington, D.C. to help support creative ideas to address caregiving needs of older adults and their care providers. And that's very exciting to see innovation in that space. But the other area that happened during COVID is that everybody was on Zoom, everybody was working remotely, and it didn't matter what age you were. Everybody was that was almost like the great equalizer. And you could contribute in many different ways, and it didn't have to be by playing ping pong at work or whatever. I mean, it was just everybody was connected in a different way. And I think the flexibility that was shown during COVID for work is going to continue, and I think that will only help older adults who want to go back to work or continue to work or change careers, given that there'll be much more flexibility in work.
Maybe what you looked like, your appearance became less important because you weren't on Zoom all day, right? I mean, you were so that you weren't. It wasn't like, oh, there's that old lady in that corner
and nobody
office,
looked good
right?
on Zoom. Didn't matter what age
Right,
you were.
right. And you weren't looking at that person all the time.
Right.
You were only looking at them for specific periods of time. That's interesting. You just said something about caregiving that raised a question in my mind. This sort of, third chapter, fourth chapter, fifth chapter, sixth chapter, is that perhaps even more significant for women because they missed out
Yes.
on employment chapters for chunks of their lives?
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, do you find that maybe men are ready to retire at 65 and women are like, oh, wait a minute?
It's interesting. In the program that I did at Stanford, the women who had taken career breaks were hungrier for their next career, not just, to do something, but they really wanted a career than many of the men who were just burnt out and needed like a year. And they just needed a year to rejuvenate, and now they're coming back and doing totally different things. There's somebody who's a lawyer, who's now a journalist, somebody who has a passion for music. I mean, it's all different ranges, but increasingly, I think everybody is going to take rejuvenation breaks. You can't work 60 years in a row and you burn out, and you need to rethink what your life priorities are. And wouldn't it be wonderful if everybody took caregiving breaks at multiple times in a 100-year life course, men and women, and they're valued for it. And I often say I was really delighted to see that LinkedIn recently, on their profile, when you list your experience, give you an opportunity to say if you took a career break for transition or for caregiving, however you want to define it. But it's no longer something that's hidden. It's something that's considered a positive, that you took time out to do something purposeful other than your traditional job that you had before. So
That's
I think
wonderful.
That's exciting.
So let's see. I'm sure we have even more questions now. Let's see. Do you want to grab someone right there?
So I love the vision that you put forth of a life where we have the flexibility and the freedom to take these breaks when we need them and to continue working as we feel we can be productive. But I worry that people in my generation are less likely to have that freedom for financial reasons, that we have gotten started later and that we are much less financially stable than had we gotten started 20, 30 more years ago. What advice would you have for me as someone who would love to live this life into my 70s, 80s, 90s with that freedom?
So you're raising one of the most important ingredients to healthy longevity, which is financial security. There's absolutely no doubt you cannot have a successful life without the financial security. So number one is to be financially literate. Most people are not. It's not taught in enough high schools. There's only a certain number of states that mandate it. So get financially literate multiple times. It changes. Also being digitally literate throughout your lifespan. You're going to need it. Some countries offer digital literacy to the entire population over 50, as an example, for free every year. Not once, but multiple times. So some people will be digitally literate, but others will need assistance. And you can only have successful aging and healthy longevity if you're digitally literate and financially literate. So those would be two things you could do to prepare for this longer life. and have enough financial security to be able to do it. The other is we need some policies to enable people to take time out and tax deduction for continuous learning and different things like that. And some states are starting to look at those opportunities. So we're going to need to get policies aligned with this new lifespan and course that people are going to want to take.
Okay, wonderful. All right, in the other side of the room, do you want to grab someone?
Thank you. You're obviously talking to a group of high achievers that have had some success. And I imagine there's a lot of excitement about this idea of all these stages. But I imagine also right now in this room there's some performance anxiety. That being, that in the first part of life there can be a lot of unhealthy striving. And sometimes you see people that enter a new career and it's not necessarily around meaning and purpose, but there's the ego says, I've got to be as successful at my next thing as I was. And so sometimes there can be some unhappiness. And I'm just sort of wondering about what wisdom you would say to people that are really beginning to think about this. And where do you start? And maybe what principles would you approach around wisdom and meaning toward things that perhaps lead people to a life of fulfillment rather than just focusing on achievement exclusively?
I would recommend the number one ingredient to making those kinds of transitions, which you're talking about, from striving to having something that's more purposeful sometimes, is having a community with you thinking about these very same questions. That was the delight of being in my group. When I was at the Stanford DCI program, all of us were rethinking what we want to do. And we weren't all striving for the next, but it was reevaluating what our priority is. But you can do this in small groups. Through community organizations, you can create your own personal advisory board. But doing it alone is very difficult and can lead you back to your maybe old paths or whatever. But being informed, and there's actually companies now that are online that help you do these kind of assessments. What are your life priorities? Financial institutions are doing this as well to help you plan your financial portfolio to match your life priorities. So I would say having a community to think this through with and having, sort of like a guided instructor on how do you evaluate what your life priorities are and what will give you meaning and satisfaction at this stage of life where you may not have to be caring about saving for your children's education or a mortgage or many of the things that many of us go through in our starting and growing stages. But this is sort of like a renaissance stage where you get to rethink what's next for the these number of years.
Let's see, on this side of the room, go ahead.
There's many of us in this room who are baby boomers, and I'll define that as born between 46 and 64. And all of us want to live a long life, a productive life. And we know that you can either be lucky or you can do hard work, diet, exercise, the usual things that have been proved. Then on the other hand, I see these advertisements all the time, usually in wealthy communities, for longevity centers or centers where you can go and they do the work for you, whether it's hormone therapy, peptide therapy, and the one that I'm afraid of the most is stem cell therapy. Could you comment, are there any data to show that any of these treatments do anything to help longevity?
The one that I respect so far the most, there's a lot of tremendously good science underway, and there's a whole longevity industry that's focused on the biologic side of aging. But the one small thing a lot of people can do is eat less. There's a lot of evidence now that intermittent fasting, which is not that hard to do, it is very healthy for you. And doesn't mean you fast 24 hours, but it's just certain interval periods you have on days, off days. But there's been a tremendous documentation. Now you have to get that cleared with your doctor. It might be contraindicated if you have some other medical conditions. But that's not that hard to do. And then walking you don't need to have extreme aerobics. If you enjoy that, that's fine. But there's just some basic principles that help you age better. The preventive public health person in me is like, don't smoke. Hopefully, and everything else in moderation. But we know that people can achieve to 100, and if you get to 100 with reasonably good health, without serious illness, without these new therapeutics, personally, I would call that victory. I mean, that would be good enough. Now, if people want to live to 150, and that's where some of the germ science is happening right now. But I think what they're really looking for is there a way we can slow disease process? And that would be a real game changer for individuals so they don't have to suffer from chronic illness.
Let's see, I think this woman in the red sweater here has had her hand up for a while.
Hi. I'm wondering if you talk about fun and playfulness, not just purposefulness, and that can be part of purposefulness.
Yeah.
Because I remember when I was 27 to 30, I thought I should be more mature and see what this adulthood was all about, and I didn't laugh, and I gave it up very quickly. I was dealing with homicide, suicide, child abuse in my career with Mass General, in the ghetto of Boston, but basically, I think a good case of immaturity is underrated, and so I'd like to advocate for that, and I was wondering if you address that, and also, yeah.
Okay. I think laughter is the most important ingredient in life. I have the good fortune of living in a household where there's lots and lots of laughter, and I think that's one of the things I discovered in raising babies, is you laugh. And I think on average, they laugh between 20 and 40 times a day if you happen to be home to be with them. So I would say laughter is one of the most important ingredients. I think that comes when you're with people. So how do you find people? What I was trying to say, why purpose, is because purpose leads you to community, and your purpose could be to have fun. I mean, it doesn't all have to be about your next career accomplishment, but it's having a way of engaging with people around common interests and common values and common goals. And you're absolutely right, fun is a very important ingredient, but I would put in there, with fun it comes laughter, and I think that's laughter and joy. It really could be the recipe more than, in my book, than some of the medications that are being developed.
Let's see, someone on that side of the room, I think we're back to there. Or...
Thank you. Could you talk a little bit about the process of going back and getting educated with people who are much younger? I can see that being stimulating, but it also is something that scares me to death.
Oh, it's
and
a
so what is that like? What does it feel like to do that?
Oh, I call it a drug. I mean, it makes you feel young again. There's nothing like being around bright students who want to talk to you. They have so many questions for you about your life and your career path and what do you think is important. And I learned, we have a whole mentoring initiatives now at Stanford that I run with different groups on campus, anywhere from undergraduates to the graduate students to even junior faculty in STEM. And I learn as much from them when I mentor them as they might learn from me, and the same in my teaching. So the brilliance of Stanford starting the Distinguished Careers Institute was that you are in the classroom with people who are younger, and they value you because of your experience. And in the course I teach on longevity innovations, we have DCI fellows there, and we have brainstorm innovation lunches a couple of times where the students come with their ideas for a new product or service, but they want to hear from the older adults. Would this be of value? And then the same way, the older adults are learning about new technologies. And like one of the great paradigms that came out of that, it was, why are earbuds cool but hearing aids are not? And that says it all, because it was the two different generations trying to figure this problem out together. We have cultural stereotypes about everybody needing to be young rather than valuing older. So I would encourage you to go to school with younger people, and I think intergenerational education is going to become the norm over time, where there's much value in bringing the two, three, four generations together in learning.
But I understand what he's saying. I mean, I would imagine it's a little daunting to think that, almost like if you were making a movie in that class, it's like young person, young person, young person, old lady, young person, young person. I mean, that you stand out.
Well,
not you personally,
no,
I didn't mean that.
I did.
But
we all had reading glasses. You always knew who was a DCI fellow. You didn't know as much technology. I had never used Slack until I went back to school. I remember calling my daughter once and saying, I have so much homework. And she said to me, Mom, don't you know nobody does all the reading? And then I kept saying, but I want to do all the reading. It's so interesting. She was a freshman in college when I was a freshman in the DCI program. So yes, it is intimidating at first. And then you realize how much they respect you. and want to know you, and you have lunches with them, and then they invite you out for beer, and my kids won't go out for me with a beer. So I even got a note today from one of the students who had just graduated, and she's going into the caregiving innovation space, and you know, it just brings joy to my heart. And that's what will happen when you go back to school. You will get joy from the other students who you can contribute and give them your wisdom and learnings.
I want to ask you a question about living to 100. Should that be a goal that people have?
I think it should be healthy longevity. And, you know, if I make it to 95 or 85 with healthy longevity, I mean, I think none of us want to see that terrible decline, one that I witnessed in my mother being in and out of the hospital so many times, and I couldn't navigate it successfully for her. And I think many of you have been in caregiving roles and have had frustrations that we just don't have the right kind of system in this country to support older adults. So the goal should be to live with purpose, with dignity. I don't think the number matters, but the fact is the number is on us. We are living a longer lifespan, and that was unheard of. I mean, that's the gift of this last 2 centuries due to public health and incredible innovation in medical care, but we're not prepared for it. Our educational institutions aren't. Financially, we're not prepared. From a fun and purpose standpoint, you know, we don't have an entertainment that's going to support that. And instead of thinking about old age as this crisis, which is what has been the norm up until just a few years ago, but about this enormous opportunity. And by the way, we haven't talked about it. It's an enormous.
But is it an opportunity if you're ill?
No. I mean, if you have serious illness and you're in pain and suffering, no, it isn't. But if it can be postponed, and all of us may have that at some point, but if you can shorten that and live a longer, more enjoyable life until, rather than this slow decline, which is what we've seen happen over the years, where there's a 20-year period sometimes for people in and out of hospitals, in and out of tests. And if we could change that course, which it sounds like we're beginning to have the ability to do, if we do more preventive care, more targeted care in that way.
When you were doing your research, I'm sure you ran into folks who lost a spouse and were living into their 60s, 70s, 80s, you know, without the spouse. How did they do?
Many did okay, many didn't. My own mother was widowed at age 56. I was a teenager when my dad died. And she had to learn many skills that she didn't have. Women are traditionally more often the surviving spouse, and often they're not financially literate. So that is like my greatest advice to every woman, is to be financially literate along the way, not then. But then they were isolated. So often people are looking for more community and connections. There are efforts to, and I think of the innovation community, is reaching out to women, not just to retool them for work, but to engage in social activities. There's companies that are looking at dating services and friendship services. People need to make new friends. It's not easy.
I've never heard of that.
I was somebody who was driving me today, moved here 10 years ago, and she said she loves living here, but she doesn't. It's not easy for her to find community. And she's even here with her husband, and it's hard. And that matters. So you have to make an effort. You can't live alone to thrive, so you need ways to connect with people. And yes, it impacts widows, in sadly, in different ways.
Did you find people who were living happily into their, let's say, 90s or older, who did not have a community, who were kind of lone wolves, or by definition, is having community a part of that success?
I mean, I haven't done extensive research on the all 90, but one of the people on our course, we bring in a panel of people between 76 and 92. And the woman who was 92 had gone back to Harvard at age 86 to do the equivalent program that I did at 86. And she's a widow, and she's magnificent. And she, kept on going and wanted new friends and new community. So I think if we have the mindset, and that was the intent behind my work, is it's not what age you are, but what stage. And she was still in a very vibrant stage. I mean, she had, walked a little slower and didn't do everything she used to do. but she was engaged and purposeful and wanted to be a continuous learner. And so the mantra in our course is, if you've seen one 85-year-old, you've seen one 85-year-old. Because there's such diversity in how people are going to age. And you'll have an 85-year-old who is sadly declining and seriously ill, and you'll have somebody going back to school for a year.
Let's see, from this side of the room.
Oh, thank you. It's such an honor to be able to ask a question. This is an amazing topic that we are exploring in our path. We're coming from Denver, and our organization is called Guided by Humanity, and we offer accessible...
It's called what?
Guided by Humanity.
Okay.
We offer accessible yoga and mindfulness to folks experiencing disabilities and really at every stage of life, including folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities. I'm particularly wondering if you'd speak to how mindfulness seems to really be the bridge to so much of what you're speaking about in terms of community, in terms of holding space to reclaim a purpose or find your passion, and to be with others who are willing to explore that with you, and then to, from there, figure out where you stand on all those levels of existence that are different, you know, as we move through life. It just seems like religion maybe was that place where we could turn to for conversation and connection, and now there's so much more research about how yoga and mindfulness is actually improving our physical health and our emotional and even spiritual health. Like, could you share about that?
I mean, it's an important ingredient. The 3 pillars of the program that I did at Stanford, which was started by the former dean of the medical school, is purpose, wellness, and community. And they define wellness on many levels. I mean, it's physical wellness, mental wellness, spiritual wellness. Mindfulness is a big part of the training programs that people participate in. And just look at the number of apps that are created out there now to help people with mindfulness. So I think every person develops their own way of developing that and integrating it into their life. But I think it's recognized as an actual science now. And you're right, prayer has served that in many ways for a lot of people as their mindfulness practice. And so it doesn't have to take any one form, but that is definitely a whole wellness component to how we can have healthy longevity is essential.
Let's see, another question from that side of the room.
Hello, mine's actually kind of fast. It's more of a fear that I have. Unless you've got a whole bunch of money, let's say if you're 80 years old and not really earning anymore, and you've got potentially 30 more years to live, how do you know the money's not going to run out? And there hasn't been that many people living to be 100 so far to have a lot of numbers on that, I wouldn't think. So how are they managing it that later stage unless they're wealthy? Does that make sense?
Yeah, we haven't seen what the model is for what I call the 5th quarter. In my book, I outlined there were 5 quarters, which is funky math. But that 5th quarter is sort of the 100+ years. We don't know what that extra is going to look like. We haven't seen what people are going to do with that extra time. But we do know people are in their 4th quarter, which I bracket as anywhere from 75 to 100, just roughly, where people are thinking about, their legacy and some end-of-life planning. But people, if they're going to live into 100, then that's all going to be pushed over. So we don't know. This is a whole new industry. It's a whole new framework for us to be thinking about. But the concept is that it's just not all the same is really what's so important to understand. So there are some interesting role models about 100. It's interesting to go into a card store these days and you'll see the 90-year-old section, the 100-year-old section is often sold out. So it's no longer rare. It's not common yet, but it's going to be. So we need all of you to be entrepreneurs in this area to help define what would those extra years are going to be about, and will they all be at the end, or are they going to be distributed over the course of a 100-year lifespan? This is brand new, and people are just thinking about it for the first time. So I truly invite you all to become an entrepreneur. 60% of of companies started people over 60 and older are more successful than those started by 35-year-olds. So
let's see, on this side of the room.
There, thank you. great stuff, especially for those who really want to live it and really experience it. And certainly those of us who live here do it with great vigor. And it's one of those things, as we age, we start on the double blacks, we then go to the blacks, and then we're on the blues, and we're okay with a couple hours. And, you know, I wonder, in parallel, when we talk about cognitive issues, you have a whole evolution of cognitive changes that occur along with your body. And I just wonder how you're looking at those things relative to self-evaluations and experimentation with ways to enhance your cognitive functions.
I mean, there's no doubt there are cognitive changes as we age. It's how you manage them, how you deal with them in terms of recognizing it. So just in terms of even learning, a 20-year-old might learn something much faster than you would at, let's say, age 70 or 75. But it doesn't mean you can't learn it. You just may need to learn it multiple times or be taught it in a slightly different way. And that might be related to some cognitive decline, but that's okay. It doesn't mean that you don't have cognition and you can't still contribute. So it's understanding yourself and recognizing at what stage of your cognitive decline you're in, and that certain things might not be appropriate for you in terms of, you know, things that require quicker reflexes than others. But to put any kind of diminution to your cognition as a sign like it's over would be a terrible disservice to yourself, anybody. And it requires just some adjustment going forward. And we know that stress increases cognitive decline, and sleep is extremely important. So there's some practices that are preventive that can only enhance what we're calling healthy longevity.
So many hands. I will keep doing this. Go ahead. You can on that side.
Hi, I'm hoping you can provide some thoughts on structural changes that are needed to support healthy longevity. I know you've talked about education, but I come at it with a personal perspective with creating an intentional, planned, intergenerational home with my mother. But there was no support when we tried to do this 5 years ago. There were a dearth of resources for planning for that kind of thing. So I'm curious about your thoughts, again, about how we can support healthy longevity within an intergenerational context.
I think that's the secret sauce. I think age-segregated communities are going to be very unhealthy in the long run. And just being, as I said, in an intergenerational learning environment was an extremely amazing and rejuvenating experience. There are organizations that are trying to match older with younger from a mentoring standpoint. One is called encore.org, which I can't say enough of great things about. They have a whole gen-to-gen program. There's a company that started trying to match older adults with younger people who do reverse mentoring. Somebody might be teaching them tech, older adult might be teaching them a foreign language. So intergenerational is very important. We're seeing community centers for older adults being developed right next door to preschools on purpose to have that intergenerational mix. So, and there's now a whole new concept around intergenerational housing. There are companies starting up to promote that. I think that is the wave of the future. I think that is going to be the fountain of youth, so to speak, for older adults, is being around different generations.
What is Encore doing?
Encore does two things. One is they have a fellowship program. If you are retiring from a job, they will place you in a nonprofit organization where you can contribute your skills that you used to in your for-profit organization, but you're also part of a fellowship, so they're training you and you're having a whole community. And then in their Gen-to-Gen program, which they've just launched, it is finding older adults to be matched to younger, and anywhere from skills, career counseling, to reading, you know, all sorts of on the spectrum of the different stages people are going through. But it's an organized way so that you're doing it individually with a younger person, but you're also connected to all the other mentors and people involved in the organization, which I really hope you hear that that's the theme. Doing it by yourself is really hard. You give it up. You know, how many of you have signed up for something, and if you weren't doing it with somebody else, you don't participate. And it's somebody else who creates community for you, that you're all going through this stage and reevaluating what to do next. But it's a very vibrant organization.
All right, from this side of the room? Is there a hand up there? No. Oh, here, right here. I knew I saw someone.
This is, excuse me, this is kind of cheating because at the beginning I had a great question, but it's been answered crumb by crumb as I've listened. So it's going to turn into a comment, so forgive me. One of my dearest ever in my life friends died recently at 103.
Oh, goodness.
And he took up painting at 60, built a house up here in Colorado. After that, learned to cook, became a caregiver. And he ate very little, he walked, he had young friends, he was financially secure, he did all the things. But I think the secret sauce for him was that he had a deep wellspring of joy. And it's easier to have joy if you've got all these other things, that's true. But I talked with him for hours and hours about his youth, about his attitudes, about everything. And I think if we all sort of let go of our peeves and our talking about politics, which is so addictive, and all the things that eat away at our joy, I think our joy will give us a longer life.
Well, that's a great diagnosis, joy. Lucky that you knew somebody so special.
That is wonderful. That's really wonderful. I think on this side of the room we had.
Thank you. I love the positive framework for longevity, changing priorities, changing purpose, and being more productive. But 30 plus more years of longevity has obviously societal impact. There's healthcare costs, there's governmental costs. I'm curious whether in your research and in your thinking, you're making space for how do we manage through that 30 years of incremental health, well, hopefully health, but incremental years of living. How are you thinking about that? Are people thinking about that from a healthcare, a cost, and a governmental and a societal perspective?
We haven't done a good job preparing for this. I mean, the majority of older adults don't have enough money to live longer lives. Housing is going to be a huge issue for them. So we have not come up with the creative strategy now on a national policy level. States are doing some pretty amazing things. A lot of states have healthy aging initiatives in partnership with Business Council. So we can look to a lot of innovation in states who are trying to create healthy aging communities. There's some infrastructure that's being created on a volunteer basis, which I don't know if all of you are aware of all these efforts, and they're mentioned in the book, but one it's called the Villages Movement, which started on Beacon Hill in Boston. And a group of neighbors who wanted to age in place and kind of wanted to share services, you know, food delivery or home maintenance, and they kind of created a village to help each other and connect. And so nobody was moving to senior housing, but they were staying in their own homes, but had created infrastructure. And now there are hundreds of villages throughout the United States. That whole organization has proliferated. So being connected will help you age better. For us, it's going to be a little bit harder because we're tacking it on sort of at the end. We weren't thinking this through as we planned our 100-year life. But for our children and grandchildren, they can intersperse those extra 30 years, so it's not all just at the end that they're having health intentionally throughout their lifespan. They're not just suddenly realizing, oh, I'm 70, I better get on this. I think it'll be better in future generations, but our norms are not there yet to support this. And National Academy of Medicine just in June put out a roadmap for healthy longevity with mentioning just all the things you said. We need infrastructure, we need education, we need transportation. So we're not there yet. It hasn't caught up. But innovation is really the opportunity now to start fixing this, and it'll take a while till our government policies catch up, but some state policies is where I get encouraged, Washington State being one of them, being very innovative right now in supporting healthy longevity.
You know, we've been talking about sort of personal kinds of things, but in your book you also write about businesses and how businesses have a whole market that they are not taking advantage of, basically, and not doing things for. And you mentioned Warby Parker as a company that does things a little bit differently.
Right.
So can you talk about what they do and sort of what that says about what other companies can do as well?
So traditionally, most companies target the 18 to 34-year-old demographic because they think they have all the money. Well, it's not true. It's people 50 and older that have the majority of spending and wealth accumulation. And Warby Parker started out, as you all know, as a hipster brand, eyeglasses, and did phenomenally well. And then they realized this is a whole population, many of us here today, who need progressives, which are pretty expensive, but don't want old people's glasses. We don't want it screaming old. We want to look hipster. And now over 50% of their revenues come from progressive lenses. They did the same kind of hip marketing. They were very careful about their marketing images of what an older adult looks like. They're trying to create an intergenerational product that you can go shopping with your grandchild or your child, and sort of like almost like a 2-for-1. But they've been very progressive in this way. And most people don't know this is considered a $22 trillion market opportunity for businesses worldwide, 8.6 right here in the United States and growing, because 10,000 people, as you mentioned, boomers, 10,000 boomers are turning 65 every day. And so this is a gigantic population that whose needs have not been met, who've traditionally been defined by fall prevention, medication management, and senior housing. And yet there's every industry that you can imagine has to be reconsidered. And the financial institutions that are profiled in the book have been among the most progressive, because they rightly said if you don't save enough and have a plan for living a longer life, you're not going to have successful aging.
Is part of the reason that companies haven't marketed to older people, is it that they're afraid it's going to taint things for the younger people? You know, they'll see advertising with images of older faces and be like, oh, that's not cool.
I don't think it's that. I don't think they understood the market. They just treated everybody the same. Everybody, whatever demarcation you want to pick, 60, 65, 70, 70, everybody was the same. And only now are companies beginning to recognize there's great diversity in aging, and that you should understand what they need at that stage. Now, marketing, it matters. I mean, and language matters. We haven't talked about that yet, but we need new words for what these new stages are as we get older, and what is this time period that we're in. I came up with a made-up word, furtherhood, but that's how I was trying to capture it. It's not like we're waiting. We're going further. We're looking forward to doing and enjoying and having fun, and it can be a very vibrant time of life, albeit at some point, you know, we will have to prepare for the end.
Well, Susan, thank you. This has just been terrific. Well, we have 2 minutes and 11 seconds. Can someone ask a question that can be answered in 2 minutes and 6 seconds, rather? Okay, you're obviously a great husband, so I'm going to pick you.
Should I waste any money on Prevagen?
Ooh, I can't answer that.
Well, that was a good question. Okay, maybe, you know, we've got 1 minute and 47 seconds. I'm in TV, so that's a lot. So has anyone got a 1 minute question that can be answered that quickly?
So we talked about wellness. What are, you mentioned sleep and eating less. What are the top 5 things we should be doing? Because you can't have this long, great life unless we're doing preventative things now. So what are your top 5?
I mean, you know, some form of exercise practice, and it could be walking. And I would talk about community. It's not all just preventive health, but it's what you eat, how much you sleep, how much stress you have, being connected to people, and I would say having a purpose.
That's terrific. On that note, then, thank you, Susan. This has been wonderful. This has been really great. Thank you.